From 12 News, this is Newsmakers.
Good morning and welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Ted Nisi, filling in this week for Tim White, who is off this week. Well, President-elect Joe Biden's getting closer to his inauguration day, and he is still filling out his cabinet. Governor Gina Raimondo remains in the mix as a potential pick for Biden's Commerce Secretary. No one is saying anything on the record about that, and it's very possible, based on my reporting, she does not get it. But if she does, of course, Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee would take over the top job at the Rhode Island State House. And we are joined today by Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee, joining us via Zoom due to these 2020 pandemic conditions. Lieutenant Governor, thanks for being with us.
Good morning.
So let's start with this. You've made abundantly clear you don't want to engage in the speculation game about what's going to happen with Governor Raimondo, the cabinet, all of that. So let me just get this question out of the way. Do you have any indication, as we tape this on Thursday morning, New Year's Eve, that you're about to become the governor?
No, I don't have any information, Ted, that would, indicate that. But speculation right now. But I do think it's it's certainly a source of pride that a governor of Rhode Island that we could be considered for a cabinet position for the President of the United States. My job has been always to be prepared in that unlikely scenario. I am prepared, and I've been working for the last 6 years to make sure that I am prepared.
So part of why I wanted to have you on, Lieutenant Governor, obviously people know you. You've won election twice to this job, but there is a brighter spotlight on you, I think it's fair to say right now, amid all this cabinet speculation in recent weeks. So I wanted to talk through your views on state policy, frankly, whether you remain in the #2 job or you ascend to the #1 job. So let's talk through first the pandemic and some of what's facing Rhode Island right now based on the coronavirus situation. You've had some clear differences with the governor on some parts of her pandemic management, particularly around aid to small businesses. But let's start, before we talk about that, what, if anything, do you think the governor's administration has been doing well so far in terms of managing the pandemic?
Yes, and all my comments, public, on the record, has stated that, that safety and health is the top priority. And as you indicated, I think that the economy is quickly became a priority as well, and we focused on that. But safety has been the issue, and I've been sitting there saying, "Look, we need to support Governor. We need to support Dr. Scott and we have done that. And right now, in terms of right now, is that rolling out the vaccine to the state of Rhode Island, the people in the state of Rhode Island, all 39 cities and towns matters. Whether it's a minority, non-minority community, high income, low income, moderate income, everybody matters. And I think that we are well equipped to distribute the vaccines in a way that moves us into a more safe spot so that our economy can open, our schools can open, which is an important part of having a state of Rhode Island that is healthy and is thriving.
And for the viewers, I do apologize if we have any connection lag because, as I said, we're all on Zoom for the very reason we're talking about, which is the pandemic here. So when you look, we are hearing reports right now, Lieutenant Governor, of a more contagious strain of the virus is starting to spread. It hasn't been reported as of this taping here in Rhode Island, but it has been reported in some other states. Do you think Rhode Island is going to need to go to more aggressive shutdown measures again, just coming out of the pause, to deal with this, or do you think this level of openness is going to be, acceptable to get through the next few weeks into the springtime?
Yeah, Ted.
Oh, shoot.
I don't know why I'm having trouble with your connection here a little bit, Ted, but I think I got your question. Right now, I think we should be focused on distributing the vaccine, and we are. I was in contact with a nursing home today that their patient, their residents and their staff has been vaccinated. This is very positive news. And what we need to do as a state, I think right now, and to answer your question about infection rates, I'm having these public focus groups, community by community right now, and talking to them about the fact this is the time not to get get tired about a COVID fatigue, this is the time actually to accelerate our energy in terms of attacking this virus in a way that keeps us safe. So I think that's the message right now. Is I do believe that a ground-up strategy supporting the top-down management decisions that the governor's made is going to be very important for us. And so that's why I'm having these focus groups. I've had one recently in Cranston, Wesley, Central Falls. We got one scheduled next week, in Warren. I happen to believe all 39 cities and towns will play a role in this. And I do believe that, to make sure that we are moving forward and our economy is moving forward, that we have to control the infection rate. We need to get the vaccines out to everybody, including our schools and our teachers. So that should be our focus right now. And I think that if we do get this buy-in, I refer to it like the 9/11 community spirit that happened when I was a mayor for 9 months, and that community, our community, there's communities all around from the grassroots level, from your civic leaders, your community leaders, to really support this idea of safety and make sure that we're following, the guidelines that will keep us safe, but also supporting a good distribution of the vaccines, as I said, into the populations that need it, that are most vulnerable, but also into our schools. Our teachers need to be vaccinated if we're going to open up our schools. Our teachers need to feel as though they're safe. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, but we're heading in the right direction. And we're very fortunate in Rhode Island to have expertise outside of the government that we're relying on that can really, contribute to keeping us safe and keeping our economy going.
So let's talk about the economic effects. And as we discussed, you've been outspoken about concerns you've heard from small businesses about the pace of the level of grants that have gone out, the pace of getting that money out the door. I just saw this morning the governor's office is saying that they've put out $51 million through the Restore Rhode Island program, which is one of the programs they've put together. What are you hearing now? Has that situation improved? Are you hearing the same complaints you've been hearing all along from small businesses?
Well, I don't consider them the complaints. I consider them really a life and death situation for the small business community. We want to make sure that as many businesses can survive and buy enough time to get to the next phase of help through the federal stimulus package with the PPP loans and that type of thing. So I just think that the small business community needs to be listened to. I'm happy that the Commerce has been able to get the $51 million out, but things have changed a little bit, and there's some good news on the horizon here. The stimulus package that the President Trump signed earlier in the week gets rid of that hard deadline of having to spend the dollars by December 30th. Governor Baker has realized that as a real benefit, and as a result, he's been able to anticipate what's coming in on the new stimulus against what was available to distribute, and he just put out $658 million to the small business community. That's 6 times what he had intended, and this opportunity of that deadline no longer being a hard deadline of December 30th to spend the COVID CARES Act funding gives us a great opportunity, Ted. And what I've been saying, what has been awarded and what is available. And right now we know that, for instance, in the pause dollars, $70 million was allocated. I believe if you really dig in, you're going to see that tens of millions of dollars that were allocated to help the small businesses still available. So what I've been suggesting is, regroup that. Moving that deadline of December 30th gives us a tremendous opportunity to be more intentional about spending the money helping the small businesses. Let's have a Restore Rhode Island 2 program. Commerce got $51 million out. That means they can get another $50 million out if, in fact, the money that has been allocated by the governor, when we do the accounting on it, we find that there's millions and millions of dollars that was intended to go to the small business, but we ran out of time. Now we have time. Let's get the money to the small businesses.
One of the concerns you've heard from others at the State House, particularly Republicans in the General Assembly, is that Governor Raimondo has done too much of her governing this year during the pandemic by executive order, and that more things should be running through the legislature. She shouldn't be making so many of these decisions on her own. What's your view on that as someone else in the executive branch? Do you think there's been an overuse of executive orders, or do you think that's been appropriate?
Well, first of all, there was no playbook for a pandemic like this, Ted, right? There's no playbook for that. So I think that Rhode Island has fared very well. And I would have liked to seen, and I'll tell you, I've been public about the fact that I would have liked to seen the General Assembly more involved. I think that that's part of the grassroots, opportunity that we have right now as the General Assembly comes back into session. We have General Assembly members that are connected directly into their communities. And when I was talking about this, this community buy-in to make sure that we're not, getting beat by a COVID fatigue, we want to reverse that. I think that all the General Assembly members can play a significant role in making sure that their individual districts are responding in a way that we're really, gaining the energy that we need to address the COVID issue and the infection rate and the vaccination issue. The vaccine issue is the top priority. I'll just give you one example. We've been having community conversations every Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. Hundreds of people are coming in, and we're bringing people to talk about this. And we had a nurse on from the ICU from Women's and Infants yesterday talking about how everybody responded so well to them, initially with the support and the rallies and the cheering. And they're missing that right now, and we need to get back to that. And I think the General Assembly can play that supportive role, and I'm optimistic that when they, get back in session, that they will do just that.
We mentioned the vaccine, and we're getting up to a break, but I'm curious, especially as someone who spent a lot of time, as you have, thinking about education policy, do you think once the vaccine is widely available, that schools should have a rule that children must be vaccinated for COVID-19 to go to school, or do you think it should remain voluntary? Again, once there's enough vaccine, obviously, for everyone to be able to get a vaccine.
Well, I'm on the record with a number of these things. I think that local districts should be making these decisions, and the state should be supporting those local districts. So I think that is a decision that can be made by the local districts, and I think that makes sense to do that. The one thing I'm concerned about on education, Ted, is the fact that there's hundreds and hundreds of hours of lost learning time, and it's not anyone's fault. It has to do with the fact that we're hybrid, we're virtual learning. We know that it doesn't matter if you're high income, low income, moderate income, minority, non-minority. Attending a public school, a private school, a Merrill Academy, a charter school, our kids are losing hundreds and hundreds of hours of learning time, and we need to be attentional about that. Otherwise, the economics future of us, of the boys and girls in our schools, are going to be impacted negatively, and our state's going to be impacted negatively. So I've been throwing out the thought process of what I did as a mayor: open up a municipal education department. We do 52 weeks out of the year, and then we do art and music and math and science and reading, and on and on and on for pre-K all the way through high school. I'd like to see an effort to create these municipal education departments around the state of Rhode Island, and to intentionally strategize to how to fill in and catch up on this learning time that is being lost right now.
All right, we have to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee about his views of what Rhode Island needs to do in 2021 to succeed. We might ask a little about 2022 as well, and whether he'll be a candidate for governor on the ballot. Stick with us on Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Ted Nesi, filling in this week for Tim White, and we're going to continue the conversation now with Lieutenant Governor Dan McKee, who's joining us via Zoom as we're working from home like most of us during the pandemic. And let's talk a little bit about politics, Lieutenant Governor, not just the politics of who knows what will happen with the governor and the cabinet and all of that, but there is going to be an election no matter what, and she won't be on the ballot in 2022. So I want to ask, have you decided yet? Are you definitely going to run for governor in 2022? And if you haven't decided, when will you make up your mind for sure?
Yeah, so Ted, I've been answering that question as that's the plan. The plan is to run, but I'm not ready to make a formal announcement. We're several months away from making that decision. So that's the plan right now, and Other than that, I don't really have much more to add to to that, but that is the plan.
So, one of the things people look at, including political reporters, is fundraising. And among some of the leading candidates, you have less money in your campaign account right now when I looked last night compared to the treasurer, the mayor of Providence, the secretary of state. Do you think you can compete financially with those folks who've been spending a lot of time building up war chests?
Well, there's two campaigns that'll go on in any election. One is the fundraising campaign, and the other one is getting enough votes to be elected. I'll do very good in the getting enough votes to get elected. All 39 cities and towns, I'm known very well and have networks there, and I'll be competitive on that first side of the campaign, which is the fundraising. But likely when you make your case to voters to try to give you the top job, what would you point to as your biggest accomplishment in your 6 years so far as lieutenant governor? Yeah, so I think that the work that I've done in the last year certainly is a response to a crisis and helping out the small businesses and responding to the health issues, because I do chair the long-term health care. So I think that in the last year we've documented everything that we've done. I know that it's not necessarily a press release is not necessarily responded to, but I can tell you that we've documented all our efforts. Our staff calls every morning at 9 o'clock. We've been at it. We're the office that answers the phone every single day and responds to people's needs. So I think that's probably would be the highlight, and it was probably the most critical time frame that the people of Rhode Island needed leadership on. And I'll leave it up to the people out there, but I can tell you that we have stories that come in that people who are very thankful of the work that we've done to help the small businesses, businesses that are on the edge. It's not just another ice cream shop, Ted. That you work with a show on entrepreneurs and people who are struggling right now. So I think that the fact that we've been out in every community, when we've visited businesses in every community, we've handed masks to every businesses that we visited that have been donated to our office to keep people safe. So, and then now we're doing a lot of those focus groups in the communities to kind of make sure that the health issue is priority, but the economy comes as a top priority as well. So our record is not only as a lieutenant governor's office over the years, is also as a mayor and a chief executive in a town where we've had a financial hardship and we recovered from that, and schools that were not doing as well as they should, and certainly I just mentioned about our municipal education office. So yeah, I think that it'll be a culmination of our work. And if I was silent during this last 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, I think people would have a reason to be concerned. But we've been very, very vocal, and we've been, I've been very out with people and really championing for their needs. And the one thing, because I chair the Small Business Advocacy Council, that was an area that I felt as though that I had a responsibility to, and I have done that. The other thing is that, yes, the governor and lieutenant governor don't run as a ticket, and the governor has, selected to, communicate with me through her executive staff. And I've done that. So when we have a small business town hall call every Tuesday at noontime, we have the SBA there with Mark Hayward, the DLT there, helping people with unemployment benefits, work share strategies for their businesses. We've had Commerce on with Secretary Pryor. We've had the business regulation with Liz Tanner on regularly, almost every week. So my connection into that and showing the leadership of actually being able to work with department heads on policy issues and being able to impact and help individuals as well as different groups is going to be well documented.
So let's look ahead into 2021 and, what are going to be some of the big debates at the State House. Right now, Rhode Island's looking at a budget deficit, could be north of $400 million, though, of course, the way the stimulus interacts with that and everything, there's a lot of uncertainty, but it looks like there'll be a hole to fill. And I'm hearing from a growing number of Democrats in the legislature who want to increase income taxes on wealthier Rhode Islanders to help close that gap. Would you support that? And if so, how much of an increase and on which households?
Well, I think that you got to be careful there, Ted, because, the projected deficit, and I'm the first elected official that got out and said, look, we don't have a $900 million projected deficit. It was being reported through all the news outlets. I think you were one of the first ones to actually, catch on that was an inflated number. Now we find that the number is closer to anywhere between 100 million and 300 million, which is significantly less than the 900 million. And I've been aware of that. I've dealt with budgets on a small scale, obviously in Cumberland, but I knew that the projected deficit was significantly higher than the actual. So you need to find out the data and the information before you jump to any levels of remedy for you don't want to try to cure a problem that doesn't exist. Let's find out where we are right now. It's far better not to be taxing people than tax people in terms of a state or a municipal leader. So let's find out what the deficit is before we jump to any conclusions on what the remedy might be. And just think of what if we jump to the conclusion of the 900 million plus deficit that was even reported as late as November, and then we reacted with legislation to address that, and then we find out we have a somewhat manageable $100 million to $300 million problem in an $11 billion budget. So I think the first thing you need to do is get accurate information, and then you respond accordingly. And the fiscal integrity of the state, and also the fiscal and the public safety of every community is a priority. We can't have a good state without having a fiscally sound and safe communities to live in. So you have to respond to what is real, not what is projected at this point in time.
Well, the other policy that's coming up a lot, partly for revenue reasons, partly because some people just think it's the right way to go, is legalizing recreational marijuana. Certainly there's been a big shift on the Senate side in terms of the leadership there sounding much more open and aggressive about maybe doing that early in 2021. Where do you come down? Do you think the time has come to legalize recreational marijuana in Rhode Island? And if so, do you think the governor's idea for these New Hampshire-style pot shops is the right way to go, or do you think it's something different?
Yeah, so I think it is time, and I think it needs to be regulated. I do also want to make sure that it is an entrepreneurial opportunity, just like anything else is in terms of an industry. And I want to make sure that the small businesses that have already invested in the effort are taken into consideration. So I'm not sure whether it's a New Hampshire liquor store model or whether it's a more of an entrepreneurial model. I think the time has come, and I think that we need to make sure that we're regulating in a way that people who are young people that could be impacted negatively. There's got to be a lot of effort there to make sure that they're not, have access to the marijuana, and yet at the same point in time, we're seeing that that it is happening, and you can't just put your head in the sand. We need to regulate it and make sure that it's as safe as we can make it.
I want to ask you about schools, in particular the state takeover in Providence. I'd say, as a lot of Democrats have backed away from charter schools, you've remained supportive of that. I know you always say as part of a larger, set of policies to try to improve education. How are you feeling right now about the state takeover of Providence schools? And, do you think they need to change their approach there, or do you think it's on the right track?
Yeah, so the education is going to be, as I said back in 2007, is the issue of our time. It continues to be the issue of our time. There's no question that we have a lot more data on the work that I've done and and put in place with that municipal education office and the value that that's had to the community in Cumberland, as well as the work that I've done in the mayoral academies. We know that young kids that are coming from disadvantaged situations that have more hurdles to jump than other kids, they can learn at higher levels than what we had in Providence. It's too bad that it got to that point where there was a need to take over a school. As a mayor, I would not have wanted that to happen in my community, and I did everything I could to make sure that didn't happen. But it has happened, and now we have to respond to that. But the responsibility that we have, Ted, on all these issues, and I think that all the district schools in Providence, all the leadership there, the union leadership, the teachers, the parents, they all going to play a significant role in turning Providence around. We have this heavy responsibility to the students and their families, and the impact that it's going to have long-term on their individual livelihoods and the state's economy to get it right. I think that we're probably, we're definitely further along to get it right now. I think that the COVID has really, halted that to a certain degree, but that's something that really needs to happen. And there's other areas in Providence that need to happen. You have Youth Build right now that has got approval to do a charter, yet we couldn't find $350,000 to allow them to operate as a charter, and they're working with many kids of color that need our help and have got lost in the district schools. So yeah, Providence is an important part, but I also think all 39 cities and towns, they play a role in this, and just as does Seminole Falls, as does Westerly, as does Cumberland. So education is the issue of our time, and I think you're going to see that happen
so I have to
in the next
there, but
campaign.
Thank you for joining us this week on Newsmakers. Tim White will be back next week.